So I think we can maybe start. So welcome everyone and good evening. Thanks for all of you for attending, and thanks for all our speakers who made it to Budapest. Today we are going to discuss the repercussions, the Taiwanese elections results. What do they mean for Taiwan? What do they mean for global security? And what do they mean for US foreign policy? And last but not least, what do they mean for the region as a whole, the Visegrad countries and Austria as well? So in an extended definition of the region, also having some Habsburg traditions and nice memories. So we had the election last week, and I think it was not only a big celebration for the Democratic Progressive Party that could win the third consecutive term and for the presidential seat. And even if the DPP have lost the majority in the Legislative Yuan, this is definitely a breakthrough in the history of democratic Taiwan. But also it was a big victory for the Taiwanese democracy as a whole. And as it was discussed in an earlier discussion today, many countries can be envious about how smoothly the elections were organized in Taiwan, and how easily the loser of the race have accepted the results. So and we can just remind ourselves that according to Economist Intelligence Unit, Taiwan has the most developed democracy in the whole broader Asian region. So Taiwanese democracy sets a model for many, but also this is crucially important for global security, and this is something that the brilliant experts today will discuss and shed a light on from multiple aspects. So I would like to thank the Taiwan representation of Budapest and Ambassador Liu and also Anna Ho for being partners in crime in organizing this event, and I'm really happy that we could have so many great experts with us today, and András Bartók will introduce them, and he will be responsible for making it sure that all of them can have their say, which will be quite a challenging task given the size of the panel, but I'm sure he will be able to do it smoothly. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor for Ambassador Liu to open up also and say some welcoming remarks. And thanks again for all of you for coming here today to the joint event of Political Capital Institute and the representation of Taiwan in Budapest, and also the ones who join us online. So thank you.
Good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Yoreste Kivano, Mindenkini. Let me start by thanking Peter and also the entire Political Capital team for putting together this wonderful event. This conference couldn't have come at a better time, given that Taiwan has just completed a peaceful and a fair, peaceful and successful election over the weekend. Yes, as Peter rightly pointed out, this is the 8th direct election of Taiwan president, and Taiwan is considered a relatively young democracy. But what makes Taiwan democracy so unique and valuable is that the evolution of Taiwan democracy often comes up with a severely external threat and interference. And this election was the manifestation of what you call the disinformation warfare launched majorly by the other side of Taiwan Strait, no doubt about it, coupled with military threat, military harassment, and also economic coercions. So the fact that Taiwanese people have been able to exercise their democratic rights through their ballot and elect their president, vice president, and members of the parliament show that Taiwan democracy once again has prevailed. You know, it's also very good to know that this year, 2024, is the year of elections. Over 60 countries in the world are going to have either national election or local election, including local election in Hungary and the election on the members of the European Parliament in June. So those elections will definitely have a huge changes, challenges, uncertainty, whatever you call it, on global geopolitics, economy, as well as security. And Taiwan was the first country among those global democracy that has completed a peaceful and successful elections. What makes Taiwan election so important? I mean, the international society had been watching very, very closely and carefully about Taiwan's election. And Taiwanese people have demonstrated once again that they were able to exercise their democratic rights, even under the external pressures and also external interference. Attentions have also been paid on how the People's Republic of China reacted to the result of Taiwan's democratic election, especially given the fact the governing Democratic Progressive Party has won the third consecutive presidential elections. And Dr. Lai Ching-te, our Taiwan's incumbent vice president, is Taiwan's president-elect now. He will be inaugurated on May 20th as the president of the Republic of China in Taiwan. And as Peter mentioned earlier, the Taiwanese voter has not only mandated the DPP government, but they also introduced elements of checks and balance in our parliament. You know, so no single party is the majority in our new parliament. This is the beauty of Taiwan. This is the true value of Taiwan democracy. So I just summarized. It seems to me there are at least three implications we could draw from Taiwan's election. The number one is, of course, Taiwan democracy once again has prevailed. The countries from around the world, the latest number is that more than 80 countries around the world have all sent their congratulatory message to the president-elect of Taiwan, Dr. Lai Ching-te. Countries like the US, Japan, Australia, Canada, Singapore, Philippines. In Europe, I mean UK, Germany, France, Lithuania, Czechia, and also some friends in Hungary too. So I think the Taiwan election has been overwhelmingly welcome and appreciated by the international communities. There were also strong signals sent by the international community to China to respect the results of a democratic election of Taiwan and to refrain from overreacting to that. We have already seen some steps made by the Chinese to punish this democratic election of Taiwan. However, the Joe Biden administration has sent a special envoy delegation to Taiwan just these past 2 days to assure their 100% support and congratulations to the Taiwan democracy. And Taiwan President-elect Lai Ching-te, throughout his entire campaign, has made it very, very clear pledges that his future government will do whatever they can to make sure that the status quo, a peaceful status quo of cross-Taiwan Strait, will be further maintained. He also called on his Chinese counterpart to resume official dialogue with Taiwan. Why Taiwan elections matters so much to the world? I'll just give you two reasons. One is, of course, Taiwan's strategic role in safeguarding global democracy and also the universal values of democracy. Number two, Taiwan's strategic role in global supply chain of semiconductor. Second implication, despite its success, the result of Taiwan election demonstrate a collective will to counteract China's continued military threat, disinformation warfare, economic coercion, and the divide and conquer strategy on Taiwan. This type of Chinese way to divide the Taiwan society, to weaken Taiwan government, will be continued, no doubt about it. But I think Taiwan's democratic system we were able to build a stronger resilience to such a psychological and disinformation warfares. Last but not the least, the result of Taiwan's democratic election reassured the international community that there will be a continuation of foreign policy from the new Lai administration, particularly to countries in Central and Eastern Europe, as well as the Baltic and the most part in Europe. In the past few years, under the current Taiwan administrations, Taiwan-Europe relationships has been greatly progressed. More economic exchanges, more educational exchanges, more cultural exchanges. And Taiwan has been able to rebrand itself to a lot of European audience. So we receive more and more support, public support, and also even cooperations from most European countries. So I'm so happy that Political Capital is able to invite all those distinguished scholars and experts, not only from the region, but also from the US and also from Taiwan. They will share with you their first-hand observation about the result of the election and its implication on global geopolitical issue and also security. So I'll leave the floor to all of them, and I'm sure you will enjoy it tonight. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's event. Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm András Bartók from the University of Public Service, and I will be your moderator this evening. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing all our distinguished guests and experts' opinion on some pressing and urgent matters regarding the Taiwanese election and global and also regional dynamics and geopolitics. Because of the time frame we have, I'm going to try to be very strict and precise. I come from an academic background in humanities and social sciences, but I did my PhD at a military institution, so I'm going to try and steal some attitudes from our military colleagues. Because of this, I'm also going to be short with our introduction, but I do urge all our guests to look at not just today's comments, but the publications and work that our experts have done during the years. Some of my students will recognize some of the names from course syllabus, so that's always a pleasure. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Yu-Yang Kuo from the Institute of National Policy Research from Taiwan, Mr. Michael Zinkanel from the Austrian Institute of European and Security Policy, Ms. Lenka Maliu-Znova from the Prague Security Studies Institute, Professor Justina Suznik from the Polish Institute of International Affairs, and Mr. Matej Simalik from the Central European Institute of Asian Studies. Just one comment, whose work on the Map Influence project I'm really a huge fan of, so I'm no longer working on that project. But no. Yeah, I do use that a lot in the course syllabi, so I'm very happy to see you as well here. So, without further ado, oh, sorry, you were at a different order in my list, but yes, and Mr. Stephen Yates from the America First Policy Institute. And without further ado, I would like to start with a question to all our guests, and I think we will start from stage right, so left, in this order. And we'll ask all our guests to try to be brief within 5 minutes. I will try to look very strict after 5 minutes. And the first question to all our guests here: what do you think is the significance of the 2024 Taiwanese presidential election beyond the Republic of China? How do you think that the results will shape regional and global geopolitical trends? And Mr. Yates, I'm sorry, we're going to share the microphone if you don't mind. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. As any of you who know me know that it will be very difficult for me to be brief. The first reason is I first went to Taiwan when I was very young, and I have had the pleasure of meeting every elected president of Taiwan. And so when people talk about how old or young Taiwan democracy is, I don't feel old enough to have been able to do that. But it's hard. Put it this way. It is easy to sacrifice a people you never have to look in the eye. And so if you have been to Taiwan and you meet Taiwan people and you know them over a long period of time, you understand the pressure and the pain that they may feel about being very normal human beings doing positive things in the world, and yet the world does not look at them the way they look at everybody else. And so I look at Taiwan democracy in a different way. When I first went there, martial law had just ended. And not even local elections had really gotten underway. To see the progress of complete democratization from the grassroots all the way to the presidency, it wasn't by accident, but it has made steady progress, and it's tremendous to watch. Second issue that makes it difficult for me to be brief is I've also had the privilege of working for 5 years in the White House, watching presidents make difficult decisions about balancing issues they have with big countries like China. And they talk about, well, there's no problem in the world we can solve without cooperation with China. So if you want to address any global security issue, economic issue, we must have China's cooperation. But in my experience, over more than 30 years, even though I'm too young for this to have been 30 years, China doesn't often actually cooperate. And at some point, we have to make hard decisions, realizing we cannot rely on this partner. Now, I might have a harder view about that than everyone else, but I think both of these foundations collide when it comes to seeing the results of Taiwan's election. Number one, the Taiwan election forces us to see the world as it is, not as Beijing tries to tell us it is. The Communist Party, and I would give the caveat, I absolutely hate every Communist Party. It is visceral, it is personal, they hate me too. But one thing they do is political warfare all the time, and they try to make you not see what you see with your eyes, not hear what you hear with your ears, but to listen to them. And so they say, there is one China. And because they say it, of course, must be true. But yet, we saw that there was a China, the People's Republic of China, that squashed freedom in Hong Kong. And now there is one China there with Hong Kong, but there didn't used to be just one China. The model that was offered to Taiwan by China was one country, two systems. What they destroyed in Hong Kong was one country, two systems. How can a reasonable human being put yourself in the shoes of Taiwan, say, oh, maybe I should make a deal with the people who just crushed a democracy that was younger than ours, and offer what? Total control after living in freedom? The other thing that you would know if you went to spend some significant time in Taiwan is that there were Aboriginal people there before people from China arrived. And then when Chiang Kai-shek was defeated on the mainland, other people arrived too. But Taiwan today is defined by a geography and values under a democratic system of governance. It is not defined by an ethnicity. And that is a concept that a racist communist regime cannot accept. And I don't use those words lightly. I come from a mixed race family. I have different colored people in my own family. But in China, you can see the people who are non-Han have been treated very differently under the Communist Party's leadership. And I end with just this opening that this matters a great deal, because we face a world where there is tension between those who want to control people, take away institutions of family, take away institutions of faith, take away any buffer between the human being and the state that governs them. And then we have systems where people can exercise their free will, and they can gather every 4 years, and they can completely wreck a legislature by making it complicated that's going to frustrate us on trying to get them to pass legislation that we would like. But it's beautiful because they can choose. And under rule of law and normal processes and with transparency, we will be able to see what we're dealing with and work things out. The model that Beijing offers is very, very different. And I would just ask you a simple question. Can you have normal relations with a country that developed and released a virus that killed millions of people and took trillions of dollars out of the global economy, can you trust having normal relations with that kind of a government? I think what we have is an example in Taiwan of people engaging in legitimate exercise of freedom, worthy partners in trade and development and investment, standing on the right side of human rights and freedom. And we have this other model. And so I think that it pushes us on our conscience, but also is going to force us to think differently, because I believe with the election in Taiwan, we also have elections in the United States, which we can talk later, that we are going to face an important crossroads of which way we're going. And Beijing wants us to choose standing by the side to let them accomplish unification. The punchline in this, though, is that the People's Republic of China has never governed Taiwan for a single day. They have no right to this territory or this people any more than anyone else does. And so I think it's important for us to think of who we are and what kind of freedom and sovereignty we want to live with, and think, should these 23 million people who have had this exercise be able to continue to be subjected to these kinds of threats from Beijing? And I say no.
Thank you, Mr. Yates. Dr. Suslик, I think we will also... No, you have a microphone there. Okay.
So thanks a lot for the invitation. It's my enormous pleasure, and thanks for the question about the results, how the results will shape the regional and global geopolitical trends in 2024. And maybe I will be a little bit provocative, but my understanding, thinking about the results of the elections and the impact, I would say that the results of the elections will not have a direct impact on the that's a global and regional landscape in this year, because it's not the elections very important per se as elections, but something that happened in the last few years in China, in Taiwan, and across the globe. So I'd like to focus on these three elements: China, Taiwan, and what has changed, because the elections and the results. And also I would like to say a few words about the results and what's the difference between the two or three parties. So so first of all, China is more aggressive and more assertive than a few years ago. So it's obvious that there is a more coercion and intimidation. That we can see this very clearly. It's obvious that when it comes to the narrative, Xi Jinping's narrative about Taiwan, I think the general line has not changed, but of course the practice, what China is doing, we can see it's every day. So it's the first very important issue. China has changed because of Xi Jinping and his policy, his ambitions. Point number two, Taiwan has changed, and I think that is very important. And I would like to also connect this statement that Taiwan has changed with the elections and the results, and why I think that there is no direct link between the results of the elections and the impact on the regional and global, let's say, landscapes, situations, so on and so forth. Because what's the most important change in Taiwan? It's the Taiwanese identity. I think this is a very important element, because when you look at these two main Taiwanese parties, KMT and DPP, it is completely different parties comparing to, let's say, our parties, left, right, alt-left, centrist parties. The main line between them are the two main the lines between cleavages between those two parties. It's its approach towards China and identity. So let's say it will be oversimplification. When it comes to KMT, it's like pro-Chinese. When it comes to DPP, anti-Chinese, so it's when it comes to KMT, let's say pro-unification. When it comes to DPP, pro-independence. It is oversimplification, and it's what I would like to say that it's not right now, but in the past. And the second element is the identity. Once again, oversimplification. KMT, Chinese identity; DPP, Taiwanese identity. And it is like very important line between those two parties, line of division. But right now, this kind of differences are disappearing because of Taiwanese identity. Most of people living in Taiwan perceive themselves as Taiwanese, not Chinese/Taiwanese. So this is the very important issue. So those two parties are becoming very similar to each other. Why? Because of Taiwanese people. So KMT could not be as few years ago, like during, let's say, Mainzhou term, because Taiwanese people are Taiwanese, not Chinese. So in that sense, those two parties became very similar. They are pro-status quo parties, and they do not want to announce independence. They do not want to cooperate with China in a sense of going for the unification. They would like to have close ties with the United States. They would like to focus on defense, increasing Taiwanese defense and capacities to deter China. They would like to have diversified relations with different countries and would like to expand Taiwan's international space. So in that sense, I would say it's my argument, my thesis, that even if KMT had won elections, there would have not been any specific changes when it comes to this situation, because China could not. I think that China still could not digest this changes when it comes to the KMT, and China still believes that they could go back to 2008, 2016 to Mainzhou terms, but I think it's impossible. KMT right now is completely different party than it was a few years ago. And even if you ask me about Mainzhou, I think Mainzhou is it's not an asset right now, and he has its own agenda. So it was very visible during the campaign. And the last point, as I said, that we have that many things has changed, China, Taiwan, but also there is a change globally in a sense that there is a growing awareness globally that Taiwan is important for our peace and stability, and it is extremely important also for us in Europe. Why? Because of two elements. First of all, the economic security since the pandemic, that we realized that we are so intertwined with Taiwan because of disruption of supply chains, and the hard security or traditional security after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China-Russia cooperation. So, and my last sentence is that it's extremely important for us, especially being here in Central and Eastern European countries, having this war just behind our border, to do everything to prevent a war or the crisis in the Taiwan Strait. Because if something happens in this region, it will be more detrimental for Central Europe than for the western part of Europe. Because for western part of Europe, it will be, problems with some supply, problems with maybe the level of life will be decreased. But for us, it could be very difficult, because if something happens in the Taiwan Strait, the United States will be in a war with China. So it would give Russia a free hand to be more aggressive. China could give Russia weapons. So it would be very dangerous also for us, even for us being within NATO. So I will stop here, if I may.
Thank you. And Dr. Simalczyk, your initial thoughts.
Thank you. I'll be brief, and I'll tie back a few of my points back to Justina's because they somewhat overlap. First of all, how's the election gonna change the regional stability? I would not pose this question this way, because it's the fact that election happened, it was expected, the choice made by Taiwanese people is a legitimate one. It would have been legitimate regardless of what the outcome is. So what is the key variable that's determining the stability, the state of the regional stability and security is not the outcome of the election, but rather China's reaction to it. It's not the fault of Taiwanese voters that something would change maybe in the region. It's really all about how China perceives it and reacts to it. So as a first point, let's put the agency where it belongs and not to so to say, to blame the victim, but the perpetrator, right? Because it all comes back to Beijing's own reaction. The way that I see how Beijing was trying to influence the election and also what its reactions to the result is, it shows that so far China is maybe still not able to wield the influence tools in such an effective way as maybe we are accustomed here with Russia, for example, from our European perspective. Based on numerous analysis, Taiwan is the country which faces the largest number of foreign influence operations in the world, and yet it failed to sway the public opinion towards China's preferred result. Also, the other forms of reaction, so far they have not been so huge, in my opinion. Of course, we've seen Nauru switching the diplomatic ties, but that was sort of in the making before the election, and it's only the announcement sort of that was, timed to coincide with the election results. It would have been seen how China would have played this should KMT have won the presidency, because it would, in some way undermine China's own narrative that it would prefer to see KMT to win the election rather than the DPP. Still, even if KMT has won the presidency, it's very hard, and it would be naive to imagine that China would all of a sudden congratulate President Ho on winning the election in Taiwan. He would still be a separatist in Beijing's own perception. So here I echo what Justina has been saying. The differences between the parties have been becoming much smaller over the years, right? And it has largely to do with Taiwan's identity, which has been evolving towards this individualized Taiwanese identity rather than a China identity, which it has been really a fast-paced evolution when you consider the data. In the 90s, you still had a majority of people identifying as Chinese, whereas now it's completely flipped, and 2/3 of people identify as Taiwanese, and remaining almost 30 as both Taiwanese and Chinese, and only very people today would claim that they are Chinese only. So herein, I think, lies one of the lessons learned from this election, that there are ways to counter these sort of influence operations aimed at your countries. And I think here in Central Europe, we have a lot to learn from Taiwan, especially as we are seeing China becoming the new hybrid warfare player in the region alongside Russia. And Taiwan can learn from us maybe how to counter what Russia is doing, because we have much more experience with that. And the two parties, China and Russia, are increasingly learning from each other and collaborating in this way. Secondly, and this goes back to the ideological differences between KMT and DPP, what it seems to me that the larger support for KMT especially in the parliamentary election is no longer determined by this ideology of are you pro-independence or pro-unification. This is no longer a thing. It's really mostly about domestic issue increasingly, and it's really policy driven on how the parties are responding to domestic issues like housing, energy prices, energy security, social welfare, etc. And this is something also where I think we can see an implication for the rest of the world, especially for the democratic countries, that it seems that if the democratic parties globally wish to protect their domestic democracies against the sways of populism, illiberalism, authoritarian-leaning parties. What they need to focus on is these domestic issues. Having nice agenda for foreign policy is great, being pro-Western is great. It's not going to win them elections, and they need to double down on these domestic issues, which is, at the end of the day, what can help them win the elections and protect the democracy globally. And this is something that I think we've seen quite well in the case of Taiwan too.
Thank you very much. Dr. Meluzinova, can I ask for your initial remarks?
Thank you. I'll also make it brief. I'll just add a few remarks on what was already said, because I don't want to repeat myself, and what was already mentioned by my colleagues. I think it's worth starting from where we ended now. I think quite a lot of people in Europe or in the US are thinking about Taiwanese elections as something that is only focused on the cross-strait relations. While it is true, yes, and of course we can think of DPP as being the one more pro-independence or for maintaining status quo, and KMT being more pro-Chinese, diminishing the importance of the elections on just cross-strait relations is not doing any good for Taiwanese or for us as Taiwan's partners. So here I would start with a few remarks on the influence operations, which is something that we can look at two perspectives from before the elections and after. Before the elections, we have seen a number of influence operations. It was rising, and it's definitely an unprecedented number of operations that were directed at Taiwan. After the elections, and this is where we come forward, is a way how we can look at them and how we can learn from them. Because for now, Taiwan is the lab. It's the lab for China on how the influence operations can be done, what are the tools that are useful, what are the tools that are not useful, and what is the narrative that can be used to sway the public opinion in their win. This is not something that is going to end with the Taiwanese elections. This is just the beginning. And China is now having a set of tools that they know how to use, which tools they should use, and how they should be implemented. So where we can come forward is learning from Taiwan, because all of the countries that can be potentially partnering or challenging for China can experience the same thing. So if we grab the chance to learn from what Taiwan was experiencing now, we can prepare ourselves as states, as Western partners, as countries, as democracies, to brace ourselves for the similar situation that might happen. Exploiting the division in the society, exploiting issues that are legitimate, but are shaped and used so that they serve the foreign preferences and how our potential adversary might be able to use them. Now back to what Justina said. She mentioned the hard security and how much it would influence us, which is something that, again, we have to look at from broader perspective. It's not just cross-strait relations, it's the Korean Peninsula, it's the South China Sea. The tensions are only going to rise. It's not going to end just because we are done with the elections. And here is where actually winning DPP makes it a bit easier, because there's going to be no changes. We can somewhat predict what their steps are going to be it towards China, be it towards their Western partnerships. It's not like we're going to wake up in a month or in May when the president is inaugurated and there's going to be a big announcement on cross-strait relations or any other acts partnerships. We can somewhat predict what's going to happen, and that can help us shape our policies even now and prepare for the rising tensions that are going to be real. And the last one, and I'll finish, is the supply chains, which I think is what most countries realize now. And there's of course, big talk, and we can come to it back in the discussion, how much of the silicon shield is actually working for Taiwan. But the truth is that all countries are thinking in broader terms about their dependencies on China and how possible conflict would influence that. And this is something what, again, we all have to prepare for, because Taiwan is being the lab. And that's something that we should use and something we should be grateful for.
Thank you very much, and especially thank you for highlighting that this is going to increase, and this is not something that's fear-mongering. China is saying that it wants to become a discourse power, so it's not secretive. These are stated goals. Mr. Zinkandel, can I ask for your initial remarks?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you for the Taipei representative office here in Hungary and for Political Capital for organizing this wonderful event and panel discussion and for the invitation. It is a little bit difficult for me now after 4 wonderful speakers already to share also my insights, but I try to touch upon a couple of the topics that have been mentioned already by my colleagues. First of all, trying to mention why the elections in the Republic of China, Taiwan, are important and of significance, which is, in my opinion, directly linked to the significance of Taiwan itself, which is quite simple, and to put it frankly, 3-4 things. First of all, the dependency on technology that we're all facing here in Europe, but in the entire world, due to the fact that Taiwan is, of course, the largest producer of semiconductors, and that we cannot get our hands off these little things here, these magical boxes that we carry around and that we can't live without anymore. So certainly that is a factor why Taiwan and the Taiwanese semiconductor industry is important for all of us. Second, the maritime supply chains. The Strait of Taiwan, the very narrow strait of maritime route between the mainland China and Taiwan is significantly important for global trade and supply chains, and also the security of goods for the entire globe, and therefore also for, of course, the European Union. We have witnessed a couple of years ago when the Suez Canal was blocked how significant that was for global trade and supply chains. Now imagine how significant it would be if the Taiwan Strait cannot be used anymore for transportation. And also from a military perspective, strategically for the first chain of islands, Taiwan has also a military very important geographic location. These are all tangible. However, Taiwan has also a symbolic value. It's a beacon of freedom, a beacon of democracy that is facing increased tension and aggression from an authoritarian player. So for a democratic value perspective, Taiwan also has that symbolic relevance. Which brings me to the elections, and the elections have significance also on a local level, because for the first time there were 3 parties and 3 candidates, which also meant that there has been some shift in voter behavior, because younger voters who tend to be more fed up with the 2 ruling parties tried now to also find a third option, a third way. However, we also heard that socioeconomic issues, bread and butter issues, such as housing, wages, were most important or more important than in the past, and that cross-strait relations were not the only dominant factor. And these socioeconomic issues were also exploited by what we've heard already, the unprecedented number of interference in the elections. So what we can see now for the trend of 2024 is the continuation of growing, gradual, intensified aggression from China, intensified intimidation, reactions in diplomatic ways. We have heard already Nauru. I think it's quite symbolic that just 2 days after the elections, the decision has been made to shift away from the diplomatic dependence, diplomatic relations with Taiwan towards China for that small island state, Nauru. Economic coercion might be intensifying as well, just to mention the possible cancellation of the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, which would increase tariffs, which would increase economic barriers also for the Taiwanese economy, again also increasing socioeconomic issues, but also possible live fire military exercises that we might be seeing in the upcoming weeks and months, which could also potentially cause accidents and therefore further escalation on the military front. However, for 2024, I think it's this continuation, this gradual intensification, and that for the mid to long period, not this year, we might see some fundamental changes that are linked to the current political landscape, but not necessarily caused by it, especially not, as my colleagues have also said, caused by the results of the elections, but more the reactions from China towards these results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Ko, your initial thoughts.
Thank you for the kind invitation and arrangement. It's great pleasure to be here. I'm the last one to talk, so it's the most challenging. I want to introduce only 4 very simple concepts to you as a Taiwanese expert in security studies. Honestly, I was very worried about the presidential election of Taiwan this time. That's the irony of democracy, because our last presidential election, 2020, all these Taiwanese people share the sense of crisis for our country because what happened to Hong Kong in 2019. But this particular presidential election, I didn't feel that from my people. Through the entire campaign, people talking about, again, property price, low wage, low birth rate, lack of energy, all these domestic policies, and national security and the close trade relation was never on the table. So I was a little bit worried. But fortunately, our people make the right choice. So that's the first concept I want to introduce, 1992 consensus. That's the major difference between KMT and DPP. And KMT's proposal spoke by Ho Yo-yi. That was not only naive, accepting 1992 consensus by refusing one country, two system, which Xi Jinping made it very clear on January 2nd, 2019, when his New Year greeting to the Taiwanese people. He says clearly 1992 consensus equals to one country, two system, Taiwan package. So for KMT as a democratic party at Taiwan, accepting 1992 consensus by refusing one country, two system is not only naive, it's dangerous. Because what after 1992 consensus is peace talk, which was unfinished during Ma Ying-jeou's term in year 2016, and to set the representative office to each other between Taiwan and China. So Taiwan was very lucky. Taiwanese people make the right choice, refusing this self-contradicting and dangerous concept of accepting 1992 consensus. So that's the first concept I want to introduce. A second concept I want to introduce is maintaining status quo, which is the Tsai Ing-wen policy line for cross-strait relations. That was not difficult. That was not easy. 2016, maintaining status quo all the way to this year, but it will be very difficult maintaining status quo for cross-strait relations or Taiwan Strait from now on, especially to year 2027. Reason, Xi Jinping this year, 2024, is not the Xi Jinping 2016. He's more powerful. His power foundation consolidation is much, much better. Look at the Central Standing Committee, 7 members belonging to not one faction, belonging to one person. Chinese Communist Party is no more collective leadership after 20th Party Congress. It's one-man party centered on Xi Jinping only. So it's more powerful than before. China is, as a whole, is much more powerful, stronger than 2016. Xi Jinping alone, 2 terms, all the way from 2012 to 2022. China's defense budget grew from $145 billion US to 285 billion US dollars, ranked number 2 in the world. And I don't know if you guys know or not, for 21st century alone, 22 years, China's economic size grew for 18 times. Its military size grew for 13 times. Meanwhile, the US economic size only grew 2.5 times. In terms of defense budget, only 1.3 times. So it's a monster. So maintaining status quo was not easy 2016, but maintaining status quo is very difficult from year 2024 all the way to 2027. So that's the second concept I want to introduce. Third concept, again, we are facing very difficult 3 years from now on, especially 2027, because coincidentally, we have presidential election every 4 years. China, they have election too within the party. That's 5 years, and coincidentally, it all fall in 2027. It's gonna be Xi Jinping's fourth term starting from 2027, the 21st Party Congress. Taiwan is just like this year, we will have presidential election, which President-elect Lai Ching-te will seek for second term. And the same for the US presidential election as well. And not to mention, starting from this year, the US will deliver lots of arms to Taiwan, including 66 units of F-16V, 108 units of M1A2 tanks, 100 sets of HIMARS, 48 sets of Harpoon missiles. So all these weapons will deliver in these 3 years. And Beijing doesn't like that, especially those missiles and heavy torpedoes, MK-48. All the things Beijing really doesn't like. So the future perspective of close-trade tension will only increase. Regardless, it's Hou You-yi or Lai Ching-te wins the election last Saturday. So that's a third concept I would like to introduce. My last concept to introduce is you, the friends, allies, partners of Taiwan. You are stakeholder for the situation surrounding Taiwan. Don't pretend you are not. I will give you some simple numbers. Every single year, do your math. More than 500,000 commercial vessels passing through the waters surrounding Taiwan. 500,000. More than 1.7 million commercial aircrafts passing through the air of Taiwan. So do your math. How many a day vessels and aircrafts? And do you really believe Chinese People's Liberation Army having that kind of military capacity to regulate or to blockade Taiwan and the waters and the air of Taiwan? And again, our colleagues also mentioned that half of the international trade passing through the waters of Taiwan. And not to mention, again, semiconductor. Taiwanese government is intentionally creating this silicon shield. I never seen our government is so effective. Never. Last year was extreme example. Our government set up 5 colleges of semiconductor at 5 national universities, including my university. When I heard it, I thought it's gonna be, talking, but only half a year. The new semester of the College of Semiconductor began. We will be training more than 3,000 semiconductor engineers every year. It's gonna be the largest ever high-tech engineers troop in the world. So that's gonna be very important, not only for Taiwan, but internationally. And Taiwan possesses 14 undersea cables for the region of Indo-Pacific. Yeah, so if anything happened to Taiwan, it's gonna not only a problem for the States or for Japan, it's gonna be a problem for everyone, including the people sitting here tonight. Yeah, so the last concept I want to introduce to you, as a Taiwanese, I really don't like to beg, to seek help from our friends, partners, or allies. This is just a friendly reminder to all of you. You are all stakeholders of the situation stability surrounding Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ko. And I have a question to Mr. Yates. In 2024, we will have another election, slightly more televised than the one in Taiwan, where either we will see a second Biden or a second Trump administration elected. I think I already know points of your answer, but what do you think either a Trump or a Biden presidency from next year would mean in U.S.-China relations?
Well, thank you. Of course, that's a subject that could take a whole evening or maybe even a week to try to address. But I trust many of you have heard of someone named Donald Trump. And when we look at what's happening in American politics, of course, there's going to be intense debate. And at this point, we have, in the United States, a very clear sense of the direction the country was going during the Trump administration and the direction the country's been going under the Biden administration. Now, we in America might have different perceptions of how that is going than it looks from the outside. It's not right or wrong, it's different angles of vision, and people get affected differently. But prior to the COVID pandemic outbreak, the United States was growing at a record economic pace. Prior to that time, there actually had been a significant modernization and rebalancing of alliances. There had been a reminder to our friends in Europe that they must honor their commitments to each other, and that the United States and the American people will not have unlimited patience for some big, rich countries making deals with another country that they want the United States to protect them from. And so that is, as Donald Trump would say, a bad deal. But there's a similar challenge, and Republicans and Democrats in the United States have had to face it, that for more than a generation, we made assumptions about engagement with China. We assumed that if we gave very generously, and make no mistake, the Communist Party of China has done nothing to make the people of China wealthy. It is the West that showered trillions of dollars of investment and privileged opportunity and technology. The Communist Party has not invented new fireworks, has not invented new cars and new paper. They have developed things that we have shared. And so I think within the United States, there is a challenge about what direction our relationship with China should go. It is difficult for me to talk about because I live a different personal experience with China. I used to be able to visit China. I'm no longer allowed to visit China. I used to be able to visit Hong Kong. I am no longer allowed to visit Hong Kong. I studied classical Chinese. I have a pretty deep appreciation for the language, the culture, the people. And personally, I see the Communist Party of China as having killed and harmed more Chinese people than any group in the history of the human race. And the Communist Party is not China. But our policies have been forced to think of just China and forget that the people in that party are different. And so our challenge has been, how can we have good relations with the innocent and harmless people of China and still be responsible for the not innocent and not harmless Communist Party of China? And I think that Xi Jinping has in some ways made this easier because he has been so much more aggressive than his predecessors. But it leaves us with a big challenge about what our economic relationship would be. There will be plenty of talk about China in the US presidential election. It will probably be among the largest foreign policy issues in the debate between Donald Trump it may shock some people to consider this, but I don't think it's a guarantee that Joe Biden is the nominee for the Democratic Party. It should be our dominant assumption. But everyone with eyes can see that he is struggling as a human being. This is not a partisan kind of gesture. It would be natural for someone of his age and health to have some consideration that he might not make it all the way through on his term of office, and that his party might think of his falling poll numbers and his relatively weak personal stamina. And so we might have more changes. But what is not changing is the American people seem to have arrived at a point where they don't support the past normal trade relations with China. The new Congress is taking up, for the first time in a generation, a reconsideration of normal trade relations with China. And that's bipartisan. That's Republican and Democrat. It doesn't mean it will pass, but it's a big change for it to even be debated, discussed. The COVID stuff I mentioned, that left a massive impact on Americans. Many families were not able to have normal funerals for loved ones that passed away. Many people lost their jobs in a permanent way because of the economic disruption that happened. And many people see that this virus did come from China. They knew, they lied, and we paid dire consequences. And so what should we do to have some sense of accountability when a government does that to our people and yours, for that matter? I don't think we have the answers about where the American people will go and the American government will go, but you can get a sense that there is a push for change, and it is not just coming from one party. But you saw that Donald Trump was already willing to change the long-standing policy and approach toward China in some ways. Joe Biden is the personal vestige of what the old bargain with China has been. He is part of the one China policy. He is part of the somewhat normal diplomatic exchange in the hope of moderating China's behavior and getting China's cooperation on other global priorities. And so there will be some tension between those two sides, talking about how to deal with this going through 2024. But I think you can get a sense. Of course, I have a bias. I make no bones about that. I think it's just important to be clear about who we are and where we're coming from, and then you can know, oh, I don't want to listen to this person, or this person is just a partisan. But I think human beings, we can look with our eyes and we can see things for ourselves. Last thing I would put as something for consideration, should Donald Trump win in 2024, something that most people in the world didn't think was possible not that long ago, he is not someone who feels bound to use the words that other people tell him to use. And it's important to understand that this is not a small issue. This is something that could be a conference unto itself, too. The Communist Party of China controls the words that are acceptable for people to use when talking about their country, but also talking about our policies. And when you control the words that other people are allowed to use, you influence their thoughts and you control their actions. This is what political warfare does at a fundamental level. So I ask you, is my good friend and our co-sponsor and host tonight, Liu Shizhong, is he an ambassador or is he a representative? Does he represent Taipei or does he represent Taiwan and also its surrounding islands? This is not a joke. I spent a lot of my life coming and going to Taiwan, and there's a lot of Taiwan that's outside of Taipei. And there were a lot of voters this time that were outside of Taipei, picking the future direction for their people and their country. And it is not the Taiwanese people that push this. We need to think for ourselves, how much control are we going to give to an untransparent, unaccountable government in Beijing that wants to threaten the peaceful and cooperative people of Taiwan? And so I think that those challenges will be on the ballot in the United States. And hopefully we conduct ourselves in a way that help others process these same challenges because they don't just face the United States.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sudlik, I'm curious on your opinion about democratic resilience. In light of this Taiwanese election, do you think, and to be clear, I will refer to China and Russia here as revisionist powers. Some might argue with that, some might not. Do you think that these revisionist powers might feel emboldened in 2024 in light of this election and in light of global affairs? Or could they be less audacious from now on?
Well, to be honest, it's difficult, very difficult question. But when it comes to China and Russia, well, maybe about China. So what we see right now is a kind of a strategic retreat or a kind of strategic pause when it comes to China. So this is also my question, and then my thinking if maybe in the coming months, maybe China would not be very provocative, because they would like to stabilize the relations because of the problems, economic problems, domestic problems, economic headwinds in China. So, you know, there's some kind of smile diplomacy that China adopted in 2022 in November in a G20 in Bali. So I think it's a kind of a moment that China would like to stabilize the relations and the environment because of the domestic problems. So in that sense, I think that maybe 2024 would be not very, in a sense, that China would be not very provocative. Of course, there could be some moments to make China more provocative, as inauguration, for example, of Latina presidency in May. But maybe they could think about be a little bit moderate. And I think that the reactions after the elections and the fact that the DPP won the presidential election, but China openly opted for KMT as a winner. So maybe it's a kind of a signal that this kind of provocations or China's behavior would be a little bit, let's say, softer than that we may expect. But going back to your question about the resilience, of course, about democratic resilience, it's difficult to answer. But when it comes to Taiwan, I would like to also refer to the elections and say that. And I will try to look at this from another angle that our Taiwanese colleague presented, because to be frank, the fact that from our perspective, China should be or was the most important topic during the campaign on elections. But you said that mostly the socio-economic issues like salaries, like housing, like energy issues, and so on and so forth is a very good example. That is a democratic resilience because there was no any Taiwanese people decided not to bow to Chinese pressure, and they were focused on domestic situation, domestic issues. So to be honest, even watching the debate of presidential candidates for president and candidates for vice president, it was my impression that the China was not at the top. Was not on the top on the agenda, mostly about this economic situation. And the fact that, to be frank, let me also say a little bit provocative statement, because I think that maybe not the biggest winner, but the winner that we should look at, focus on is the TPP, to be honest, because Cohen-Jer gained many votes, 3.7 million. They have more. TPP had more seats in a legislative yuan, and TPP is right now in a pivotal party. So the TPP, to be honest, will decide because they could cooperate with KMT. There was some kind of talks before the elections, and And the fact that Taiwanese people decided to vote for TPP is because of they are looking for, in my understanding, they are looking for a party who will focus on the domestic issues mostly, not on China. So, in that sense, I think that we see it as democratic resilience when it comes to Taiwan. And the last point, maybe, because we are talking about what China can do after the elections and knowing the results, and I think that one issue is important, that we are talking about this military exercises, coercion, cognitive warfare, hybrid warfare, graze and operation, but I think that bearing in mind that the DPP lost the majority in the legislative yuan. But we see that we have TPP and KMT together has, those two parties have majority because they have 60 or 61, 60 seats. So they have majority. And there are people that they would like to cooperate to some extent with China. China could have some, exert some pressure on these legislators to block some bills that are not very good for China. So I would like to pay attention that China could use another channel to use this, let's say, kind of gray zone operations activities using the people in the legislative yuan, bearing in mind that will be minority government with a divided government. So I'll stop here. Sorry for being so talking too much.
Thank you very much. And I will turn over to Dr. Shimadzik. What do you think that the case of Taiwan can teach us about resilience? Where are we in Europe in terms of being resistant to Chinese influence operations? Do we have weak spots? Can we fix some of those weak spots using things we learned from Taiwan?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, definitely, we have a lot to learn from Taiwan when it comes to resilience. But let me first outline kind of where we see. Where I see some choke points, so to say, or existing risks when it comes to our own resilience vis-a-vis China. They somewhat overlap with our weak points vis-a-vis Russia as well, because a lot of them also stem from domestic politics. But we could group them into sort of three pillars: political risk, geopolitical risk, and geo-economic risk, where we see sort of three main sort of groups of risk when it comes to China and Europe, or Central Europe, if you will. Political, we see in the political aspect, we see that of course, China has arrived. China has arrived and is playing with this gray zone operations. And when we often sort of simplify that to just disinformation and propaganda, but it goes beyond that. And I dare to say that when it comes to the political risk, we have a bigger problem than just disinformation, because China is not doing disinformation very well. And that problem is corruption and elite capture, which China has been doing very well. Despite numerous and repeated warnings over a long-term period from secret services, we have yet to rise to the challenge properly. We are very slow in rolling out legislative response to this sort of elite capture tactics or strategic corruption tactics. And just think of all the journalists, quote unquote, from disinformation outlets or extremist politicians who go on these paid junket trips to China, and still we have no legislation to sort of deal with that. At minimum, to at least make it transparent, so that we at least know about this. And this is where we are still lacking a proper response. Secondly, geopolitical risk. There is still this ongoing perception that China is far away. Taiwan is far away. Indo-Pacific is far away. But, despite de-risking, decoupling, we are still living in a globalized world, and they are not as far away as we might think. Taiwan is not the only sort of point of geopolitical risk that when we are talking about Indo-Pacific. South China Sea is something that was talked much more in the past years than it is nowadays, but it is still a very likely place where some sort of conflict may flare up, also due to the fact that there's just much more parties involved in that conflict, and that creates a whole sort of unpredictability in and of itself. You might think that why should an inland country, landlocked country like Hungary, like Slovakia, care about this, right? It's a maritime issue. What do we care? We are a country in the middle of Europe. Well, let me just quote some statistic. There has been a 2016 study by CSIS, an American think tank, which estimated that in case of V4 countries, as much as 6-7% of overall trade is dependent on transportation via South China Sea. Our trade exposure towards East Asia, not just China, but East Asia, has grown since. So the number is probably larger nowadays than it was in the past. So this is one of the main reasons why we need to pay attention also to these geopolitical risks and China's growing assertiveness, not just globally, but also in its very periphery, where the impacts of any conflict would be huge on us. Just, you know, we see people talking about what are the economic consequences of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I can guarantee that whatever conflict would happen in South China Sea or Taiwan Strait, the impacts would be multifold larger than what we are facing nowadays. And this sort of pivots me into the geoeconomic risk, which I think is something that we need to maybe think about much more than these political ones like disinformation or propaganda, because as was said before, we've grown complacent through the years, and we've allowed ourselves to become really very much embedded into trade relations with China, or supply chains that have China as a core component of that, and that's something that we need to sort of react to. First of all, and the case of Lithuania has showed that to us quite clearly. We have underestimated the hidden risk of indirect export exposures. Lithuania, like many other Central European countries, has a very low exports to China, which you may think shields you away from China. But these are economies embedded in global value chains, and they produce intermediary products that are exported to other countries, where they get built into final products which at the end of the day find themselves on the Chinese market. And we've seen this highlighted in case of Lithuania, where China was pressuring German companies to stop trading with Lithuania, or stop using Lithuanian components in their final products that they want to sell on the Chinese market. And this has been really much a hidden risk, because it's very difficult to track. Nevertheless, we've over the last year, we've done a series of studies at my institute, and for countries in Central Europe, those are the ones that are most exposed to this indirect risk throughout the whole European Union. Lithuania, Czech Republic, the discrepancy between direct export and indirect export is as large as 250%. We in Slovakia have direct exports to China worth 2%, but taking into account this indirect is almost 6%, which is really large when you think of trade in terms of GDP, and for a very much export-oriented economy. Secondly, we have big risks related to the automotive industry, which is the backbone of Central European economies. The risk is twofold. We see that China is becoming a dominant player when it comes to electric vehicle production, which means we are logically going to see fall of car exports from Europe to China, which has been an important component to our trade with China in the past, which is going to lead to lost jobs, probably diminished GDP output, etc. Secondly, our own automakers are going to transition into EVs as well, and we see new input dependencies emerging when it comes to battery industry. Just think of the recently announced 2 huge battery plants in Central Europe, Cattle in Hungary, Goshen in Slovakia, and these are just 2 that are happening in the region. And third issue that we also need to think about really clearly when it comes to geo-economic risk in China is energy transition and energy security. You know, yes, we can no longer rely on fossil fuel imports from Russia. That has been a risk for ages, and we are finally seeing the ramifications of it. But in terms of transitioning to renewable energy, over the years we've allowed China to gain monopoly over the solar panel industry, despite challenges mounted by the EU at the WTO, which were largely unsuccessful in terms of final effect. And now we are facing this sort of pressure when it comes to wind turbine industry, where EU still has a lead on China, but it needs to put its act together to protect it and maintain its own competitiveness in this field as well.
Thank you very much. And now to Dr. Meluzinova. I feel embarrassed because part of my component of my question has already been answered by you and other panelists. So I wanted to ask, is the Taiwanese election a result of a failure of Chinese influence operations? And we've kind of touched on that issue as well. But how strong do you think China as a regional and global narrative or discourse power is? Where can we put China in terms of weight in this field?
I think here I would probably start from the end and answer the question of what is the ultimate goal of having a strong narrative. For China, that would be securing the safety of the CCP. That is the ultimate goal. With that in mind, I think the best example that we can turn to is China looking at the US as the one who are winning the war on discourse, because American dream is something that doesn't apply well on the China dream, because it's just not the same. Simply put. CCP is focused on securing its survival. And with that in mind, they are shaping all of the steps that are taken, be it on the geopolitical level, political, geo-economic level, social, all of them. And it was the leadership of the CCP that said that it was the discourse that allowed US to win on all of the fronts that they are winning on right now and assert the global dominance. There is a term for discourse power. I apologize. My Chinese is a bit rusty. Huaiyuquan should be the term that translates to discourse power. We can translate it as, literally it means discourse power or law to have. Yeah, I'll stick with discourse power. The closest translation that I would use for this is to tell China's story and to tell it well, which is what China is. Oh, sorry. It is a term that was already used in 1990s, but of course it was gradually getting more and more popular as was changing the tactics and ambitions of the CCP and PRC. And here I would talk about two areas that we haven't really touched upon. That is digital realm and global south, so that we have one more strategic and one that is geopolitical. And they are interconnected. China is investing in the global south on multiple layers while using the narrative of we are different than the Western countries. Of course, we are all sharing the distrust that we have towards the Western system, and we are coming to you as a developing country, which is what China is calling themselves, a developing country. So that is for global south. Digital realm is China helping to shape information environment and information system by either providing infrastructure, physical infrastructure at really good cost and with zero conditions, which is not what the West would do. Usually if West provides something to developing countries, there are always conditions on how it can be used, how you can spend the money, how you can use this technology. Nothing like this with China, which is of course a big win. Now in Global South, China is investing in the digital realm. So if we put these two together, we get a Chinese digital infrastructure that is being built in the Global South at minimal cost with zero condition on how it should be utilized. Doesn't seem like a big issue yet, right? In few years, the information environment in the Global South will be shaped by what is China providing right now, both physically and in the way it works. So, coming back to your question, building the discourse is something that can be done in the information environment, by strategic communication, by disinformation, by hybrid warfare, but it's also something that can be done physically, by building the infrastructure. If we put these together, we get countries that are using Chinese systems on Chinese values and strategic narrative that is built around the way China wants us to see them, to see their environment, to see their politics, and they're doing all this while saying we are not the same as the West, and we understand why you would distrust them. So, finishing up with something optimistic.
Thank you very much. I feel a bit less reassured. Mr. Zinkanel, in light of these Chinese efforts to increase China's discourse power, how well do you think we in Europe are prepared? Can we, the same question to you as Dr. Sima, can we learn anything from Taiwan? How do we hedge our environment against these influence operations?
I'll try to be a little bit more positive and optimistic, although probably I'll mention some of the difficult stuff and the hard to swallow pills before. First of all, we have to understand that Taiwan has been, over the last 10 years, a prime example for Chinese influence on various levels, especially disinformation, but also in terms of cyber attack, in terms of trying to affect the country, the effectiveness, the efficiency of the economy and the political realm in the cyber domain. So for 10 plus years, Taiwan has been a lab, has been a sandbox example for these threats. And for Europe to try to learn from this experience, I think we can follow a very simple formula of 3 steps. First of all, to understand the threat, also by studying the sandbox example of Chinese influence in and over Taiwan. Second of all, identifying strategies and tactics that are being used by the adversary. And third, developing countermeasures based on the first 2 findings. But only by understanding what the threat and the tactics, the strategies actually look like, we can develop these countermeasures. And let me give you a couple of examples of especially Chinese disinformation during the last couple of weeks and months leading up to the elections. We have already heard that it has become unprecedented in terms of the scale, but also in terms of the intensity of these attacks. And what is quite remarkable is that China has learned a lot over the last couple of years from the Russian disinformation playbook, but they have developed it further. And in the case of Taiwan, they have been able to very systematically use it in terms of targeting topics and issues that have already been emotionalized, that are already polarized in a certain narrative within the society. For instance, food shortages have been mentioned by disinformation campaigns, but also mandatory conscription, US support. These are topics that are emotionally connected to people. And these topics, because of their emotional weight, do work in terms of influence and manipulating. Also the mindset of the people, not necessarily vis-a-vis the outcome of the election, but vis-a-vis the general sentiment of a society. And we have seen similar tactics also during COVID-19 and also during the disinformation campaigns that have been used by Russia, but also by China in the European discourse. So COVID-19 disinformation, especially in early stage in Central and Eastern European countries, were targeting a predefined emotionalized mindset within the societies due to xenophobic or homophobic messages. For instance, that that COVID-19 is spread more through migration, or COVID-19 is spread more through not heterosexual sexual practices. So that has already been an example of tapping into predefined emotionalized discourses. In addition to that, we can see this tailored approach, this systematic approach, and also the amplification of local voices. So what also has been used quite a lot within the last couple of weeks and months is that local Taiwanese influences have been used as proxies, as amplifiers of these Chinese discourses and disinformation. So the lesson here is also for Europe that it's not one-dimensional, it's not stable, that the strategies and the tactics are constantly evolving, that we have to already think one step ahead. For instance, when it comes to AI and deepfakes, which are new concepts, new methods, how to spread and also create disinformation, which are becoming more and more effective. So that especially the Chinese information campaigns are more fluid and are more tailored than we probably have expected in the past. Having that said, how is Europe prepared for that? So this is more the positive note now. Europe and the European Union in particular over the last years, but especially last year, 2023, has evolved and developed several strategies to counter what has been defined not only as disinformation, but as FIMI, as foreign information and manipulation interference, which is a broader term, which involves more aspects from a conceptual point of view. However, that also includes psychological warfare, that also includes cyber actions. And just to give you a couple of examples, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act of last year, the Critical Raw Material Act of last year, the due diligence in supply chains, but also the anti-coercion instruments are just examples how the European Union has developed in terms of mechanisms and strategies to try to tackle this interference, not only by China, but also by Russia. So I think that we can still learn a lot from Taiwan, especially, and I'm coming back to your comments, Matej, from before, with regards to anti-infiltration laws. Taiwan has developed quite a substantial set of laws to legally prosecute people and targets that have been bribed and corrupted by China to fabricate and to distribute false information. That could be something that we can also think about on the legal aspect here in Europe, especially not only to tackle Chinese interference, but also Russian interference. Russia has spent hundreds of millions of euros over the last years to target political parties and political entities in the European Union. So that could also help to decrease the influence that Russia has politically and economically. So having that said, I believe that there is still a lot also to be learned from Taiwan, and that especially 1.5 diplomacy track dialogues could be a useful vessel to deploy a new mindset, to have more people-to-people relation, to understand the problem better, and based on that understanding to develop adequate countermeasures that also apply for Europe. But if we understand the Chinese involvement in Taiwan and in Eastern Asia better, we can understand also the involvement and the interference in Europe better.
Thank you very much. And my final question to Dr. Kuo. I wanted to ask, how do you think the results of the election in Taiwan will affect cross-strait relations? But I think you have pretty much already answered this question of mine. So I'm going to improvise a little bit. Because I also have another question for you. Whenever I hear Taiwanese experts on security studies and security issues give lectures and participate in panels, I am always personally very happy to hear them use the word deterrence a lot. The reason I'm glad to hear it is because I'm teaching at an institution where we engage with military personnel, and here in Eastern Europe, deterrence in the Hungarian language usually only refers to, or is usually only used in terms of nuclear deterrence as an answer. So I have to admire the way that a much smaller sized country than the adversary is able to deeply appreciate this idea of deterrence, so doing something in order that the other side doesn't do something. And I'm really curious, because even when you talk to Taiwanese non-security studies personnel or people, or when you look at Japan, where now deterrence as a word is entering into strategic documents, where it didn't used to be. So what's the recipe of teaching people a strategic concept where you do something in order that the other side doesn't do something, deterrence? How do you make it work? I think here in Eastern Europe, we will have to learn to teach deterrence. So I'm curious, what's the secret for it?
Thank you. It's a very long question. I feel like I'm doing oral defense. For this deterrence strategy, or so-called asymmetric strategy, from Taiwan to China, it actually bears a couple of backgrounds. First of all, again, there is not, even the United States today, there is no comparison between the military capacity, overall capacity, comparing US and China. If you look at Chinese Navy today, they have more than 450 destroyers. Meanwhile, the U.S. only having less than 240. And the projection to 2030, Chinese Navy will have more than 500 destroyers. And I'm not talking about 3,000 tons or to 6,000 tons destroyer. I'm talking about 10,000 tons. Meanwhile, the U.S. destroyer is usually weighing from 6,000 to 8,000 tons. So there is no comparison at all. So it's gonna be very stupid if you try to, build up, the same size of military. I mean, from the States, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, or the Philippines. So the only thing we can do is asymmetric. That's number one. So number two is the very special battlefield environment, landscapes of Taiwan. A lot of people don't know. When it was 1943, China's A2AD strategy is not indigenous. China's A2AD strategy is actually coming from the Imperial Japanese Navy. When the Imperial Japan tried to try to stop U.S. influence to Asian continent. So that's the strategy Imperial Japanese Navy applied. So when there was two fleets, one, both generals starting from South Pacific, one is General Nimitz, the other General MacArthur. They all starting from island hopping strategy from South Pacific. General Nimitz ended up at Okinawa. General MacArthur ended up at the Philippines. And they did have this joint meeting if they should attack Taiwan. And the conclusion is very simple. It's gonna cost too much lives and too much time. So they turned north, straight to mainland Japan. They did the calculation based on the landscape of Taiwan. More than 70% of Taiwan is a very small island, only 30,000 square kilometers, but more than 70% are mountains. not short mountains. We have 268 mountains higher than 2,500 meters. We have 200 mountains higher than 3,000 meters. I'm telling you, modern weapons are useless in that kind of landscape. If you look at the water, Taiwan Strait is wide, but very shallow. The average depth is only 60 meters. You don't want to do an amphibious assault from China to Taiwan through Taiwan Strait, because there is only one channel, Penghu Channel, which is, the deepest water is only 100 meters. It's too dangerous for invader. Taiwan's east coast is, the water is deep enough, 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer depth. But the ground is too narrow because of the mountain, from north to south. So only leaving 2 spots for possible amphibious assault. One is Okinawa Trench in the northeast, Kaohsiung Trench in the southwest. And we are not stupid. We've been building our military, emphasizing all these possible spots for landing. And not to mention is also the U.S. policy, changing from President Obama, this hub and spoke, to networking its allies together. Again, because U.S. cannot, overnight, beef up its overall military capacity. So the best United States could do today is to reshuffle, to recombination of its allies' military capacity, including Taiwan. Yeah. Probably people don't know, Taiwan is actually very good at building missiles. It is United States government to limit our, stockpile of missiles, shooting range, and the explosion of warhead. And the U.S. government changed their mind. So, which result, the first island chain in the coming 2 years will be a firing all the way from South Kyushu, Okinawa Islands, southwestern islands of Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines. All these countries will deploy more than 2,000 anti-ship missiles with range more than 1,000 kilometers, which is a very good deterrent to POA air and sea activities along the first island chain. Yeah. So bearing with all these backgrounds, the U.S., landscape of Taiwan, and the overall security environment of East Asia. So, Taiwan is not doing this alone, this deterrence strategy. We've been partner with the States, Japan, and possible the Philippines in the coming years. Yeah. And I actually want to get back to the lady's comment just now. China is having big trouble economically at home, but please remember, Xi Jinping is the person without economic logic. So if you look at 2022, China's economic growth rate is only 3%, lowest ever. But China's defense budget grew for 10%. This guy is building a non-sustainable military system, which, in the years to come, 2028 to 2030, when China formally enters aging society with more than 20% of people older than 65 years old, there will be the time Chinese government will have to pay the bill for social welfare. They are paying 40 billion US dollars for social welfare today, but 298 billion 2023 for their military. And when years to come, 2030, it's going to be the opposite numbers. So Xi Jinping knows that very well in their heart. So again, 2024 to 2027 will be the best shot for Xi Jinping and China to solve this so-called Taiwan problem. After 2028 or 2030, China will not have that kind of luxury to look at Taiwan. They will have a lot of domestic problems. This is just the beginning of Chinese domestic problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kuo. And unfortunately, we only have time for one final audience question. So I would like to ask if anyone in our audience would do the honor of closing today's discussion with a final question towards our panelists. Yes, we have one gentleman here in the.
Thank you. Based on your guys' various statements, from what it sounds like, we have a couple years till China reaches its peak of power. And we also see the US and its various Asian allies kind of being drawn to it, but also away by other things like Russia and issues in the Middle East, as always. So would it not make sense for Taiwan to make a move now and not just wait for the bomb to go off in a couple years? Given all the, if you've seen recently the Chinese military corruption, their nukes don't even have gas in them, and the US needing its HIMARS for Ukraine and other places, would it not make sense that Taiwan makes a move for either to choose some path that's not just sitting in the middle between multiple powers?
So, would anyone from the panel like to comment on the question? Yes.
Thank you very much for your very straightforward question. We are not sitting and watching and waiting. We've been doing a lot, again. And then second of all, I believe all the US allies have been preparing for a war without solid reliance on US security protection. So that's the reason why a lot of countries, democracies, they double up their defense budget, including Germany, including Japan. Yeah. And third of all, US allies are outreaching to each other to avoid overstretch of US military capacity, you know, two fronts or triple fronts. Yeah, so you've been seeing, you know, South Korea, Japan, Australia attending NATO summit for the previous 2 years. So that's the situation now. So again, we are not sitting and waiting, and we are pretty much sure, especially about rocket force. Xi Jinping is having a big headache about that. The new rocket force commander, he's from Navy. He's not a rocket force guy. And the deputy commander is from Air Force. Those two guys put in position is not to command. They are there to do further investigation. So it's gonna take a year or two for Xi Jinping to resume his confidence on POA. Yeah, so they are having trouble, and we are not sitting and waiting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your candid question. Before I would ask our audience to give a warm round of applause to our panelists, I would like to thank Political Capital and the Taiwanese Representative Office for organizing this event. I would like to give over the microphone for a brief comment to Mr. Peter.
Yes, but I think first the panel really deserves an applause. Thank you all, because it was really a thought-provoking and very nuanced and very detailed and very deep conversation. So thanks for all of you again for coming to Budapest and accepting our invitation. Thanks, András, for moderating the panel. Thank you for the Taipei Representative Office in Budapest for making it all possible. I would like to also extend a thank you for my colleagues at Political Capital who made this event possible, Katalin Szitás, Hanna Faludi, and Rudolf Berkes. And last but not least, thanks for all of you. Yes. And last but not least, thanks for all of you for your persistence and staying here. And I think all of you probably deserve a glass of wine that is served outside. So thanks for coming, and looking forward to have you at our other events as well.